that Amos is addressing as he gets his oracle. And in your lesson, I don't remember now if we went into the idea that the word oracle actually means a burden. And so when he says, and in some translations it doesn't even use the word oracle, it'll use the word vision, but it's actually the word oracle. And that Hebrew word means to be burdened, with a heavy burden. And so when Amos is getting these, he's not just like, watching YouTube in his mind. He is actually being oppressed with the realities of the state of his nation. And he's carrying this burden that he has to deliver to the people. And I can't help but think all the time when we're studying this, what it must have been like for a prophet like that to receive that kind of word of judgment. No, he's one of the recipients of it. He's to declare it, but he sees the absolute obstinance of the people to hear. That's somewhat how I feel in the world today. I feel like we kind of see the problems, they're kind of blasting at us. We see the deterioration of our country. We see the inward destruction that's going on, and yet we can't stop it. We can't stop it. And yet these words of God were coming right out of Amos's mouth about the horrible, terrifying things that were going to take place in their nation in a short period of time, and he couldn't stop it. And he's going to be one of those people that it comes against. And so are you and I. When the fall comes, we're going to be right in the midst of it. And that's what's very difficult about this, is that these oracles of judgment are burdens that he's bearing because he sees the dramatic outcome. And the Assyrians were known to be extremely cruel, very, very cruel people. And so what was coming was not nice. We today, and it makes me just shudder to think of it, we get visions of, I don't even know the term to use for sure, but people who cut people's heads off because they think they can. And that is just such an atrocity to me. I can't even watch it. I can't even, and then of course they don't show the actual, although it's on there, but we have our media at least doesn't show the realities of what takes place there. But see, the Assyrians were even worse than that. That is a mercy killing to an Assyrian. And yet, so to think that Amos knows, these prophets know, that this is the potential outcome of them and their family and the people around them that they love. This horrible, torturous thing that's going to come. I can't even imagine bearing that burden. But that's what he's doing. And so on your map, you have the distinctive areas, and you can see that they're all around the nation of Israel. And really, if you got to the bottom line of this, all of these countries really do come from Abraham. They're going to go back to the descendants of Abraham. Even though it's Ammon and Moab and those kinds of places, they really are descendants of the Jews. They have just gone off and become separate nations other than the 12 tribes. And because remember, the 12 tribes don't come until after Abraham. They're the sons of Jacob. So during the time of Abraham and before, when it was Esau and his descendants, and that was going on, and he was removing himself from the rest of his family, that's what some of those nations are. As we said, Edom is actually Esau's descendants. And then Moab and Ammon are from Lot's offspring. When Lot went out and Sodom and Gomorrah was destroyed, and then remember that his daughters had sex with him and had babies by them, and they became Ammon and Moab. And so, but see, these are all still Israelite bloodlines. And so really what we're seeing here by these oracles of all these nations, it creates this whole circular thing when you go down through to Gaza and then you go all the way up to Damascus, which it shows on this map, but it didn't show on yours, so I hope you put it in. If you didn't, you can see it up there, put it into your map. But those were the borders from all the way from Edom, where you can see Judah, Edom is right down below that, all the way up to Damascus was intended to be the land of Israel. And so he's really, when he's giving these oracles, he's really including all of the people of Israel from clear back to the history. And he's judging all of them, passing judgment on all of them. So on your notes, you can see that my subject matter is the decline of nations. And the reason I'm doing that is because you're going to see a vast difference, especially in the first chapters of Hosea, when we get into Hosea next, between Hosea's message, or the way Hosea delivers his message, to the way Amos delivered his message. Amos is just, it's an outcry for social reform. The rebellion of the people has led to a social corruption within their nations, and that's what Amos speaks to. Hosea speaks to the corruption of the spiritual aspect of Israel's dedication to their covenant God. And so we're going to see a little bit of a different bent between Amos and Hosea. And so what I want to draw attention to here, and I hope that we will throughout all of the prophets, is to somehow gain a practical perspective of what happens when nations rebel against God, whether they're God's chosen people or whether they're not. The same kind of corruption, the same kinds of underminings take place for every nation, and it's just interesting to see what they are. So we're gonna talk about, first of all, in the corruption of God's chosen, we're going to talk about how they got corrupt, the things that brought them down, and then we're going to look at how every nation has issues that they face within the nation that eventually brings their downfall. So, and then our question, the bottom line question that I want us to all go away with, which is at the end of your notes, is what is our part in that? What is our part? When I think of it, it's overwhelming, as it must have been for the prophets, that I'm just one person. And we've got a whole corrupt government and a whole sections of society that don't even think God exists. And so they're not going to listen to God's outcry for the things that he knows that we as human beings need to do. So what do? I can't change the nation. Neither can you. Excuse me. So but we know we have to play a part. We're here for a reason. And that's one thing that we have to understand. Because of the fact that you were born during this generation, in this country, you have a part to play in it. And it's like, what is it? I'm sure there was a time when Amos didn't think out there among the sheep that he really had a big part to play either. And I'm sure right now he's thinking, I would have chosen a different part. But the fact is, this is where we were born, this is the time we're in, this is the country we're in, and we have a part to play in that. So we want to really, from this, look at the principles that are happening within Israel and with every nation that becomes corrupted. And I love the fact that Kaylee's here, my wonderful niece, because what we need is this needs to go to the next generation. They need to be aware of what's happening in the bottom foundations of our country, and now is rising up because she and her peers are going to deal with the next worst case scenario that comes after ours. Because this is what happens when nations go through these processes. And maybe they will be the ones that make it. Maybe God will call up a revival during her time because they understand what's happening within their nation. So I think we need to become aware of that, and we specifically see it in the prophets. We see it against the cry to the nation. And that's another thing that we have a little bit of trouble visualizing, because we are very independent and individualized in America. The Jews were not. The Jews, God spoke to them as a nation most of the time. They were a national system, not just an individual system. But some of the most individual responsibilities fell to the kings and the priests and the prophets. They were the ones that were supposed to keep the people at a place where they were still having God in the forefront. And so they are going to suffer individual responsibility where the nation is going to suffer on their behalf. So we're going to look at, first of all, the corruption of God's chosen, which is his chosen people. And this is funny because the thing that reminded me of, well, I won't get off on that, I'll let you know here in a minute. Okay, see, my problem is I never think about all these things that I want to say before I start the lecture. And that's why I always go over. But anyway, number one, they were corrupt despite God's deliverance. God had come in and delivered them from Egypt, which is your underlying thing. Despite that deliverance from Egypt, and if you'll notice as you study Amos and the rest of the prophets, he will always bring them back to that. Don't you remember when God delivered you out of it and he took you through the wilderness? It always goes back to my deliverance. I delivered you, and I delivered you to be a free people, free to serve me in complete despite God's presence. He delivered them from Egypt, brought them out into the desert, and set himself in their midst with the Shekinah glory and with the presence of God in the tabernacle once it was built. So despite his presence right there in their midst, they still were corrupted and rebelled. So, and that presence gave them these opportunities. And the analogy to me, to all of us here in a minute, is what was the most mind-boggling. Despite his power, right there present with them. Do you remember last week we talked about the fact that they did not want a prophet? I mean, they wanted a prophet. Just the opposite. They wanted a prophet because they did not want to deal with God's power. The mountain is going crazy. The lightning and the thunder and the sparkling and all the things that are going on, and they're like, whoa, baby, I don't think so. Moses, why don't you go talk to him and then let us know what he says. That's kind of what we do when our kids are misbehaving and we say, do you want to talk to your dad tonight? Or would you rather deal with me? You know, so it's kind of like that idea. And they're like, we don't want to talk to dad, we just want to talk to you. And so he's got to go talk to dad, which is usually what wives end up doing, right? So despite his presence, his power was right there visible for them, and that would be enough to scare your socks off. I can understand that. But besides his power, what was also present with them was his love, his provision, and his protection. So when you've got that kind of power, and it's towards you in manifesting love and protection and provision, he said, when you go into the land, all of those ugly, terrifying people that are bigger than you and stronger than you, I'm going to take them out for you. You know, when you go into the land and you've been living out in the desert for so long, I'm going to take you into a land that is so full of grapes and fruit and the abundance of the crops that are there. You're not even going to have to do that yourself. You're going to get off the manna, and I'm going to just inundate you with the best fruit of the land you could probably find. Despite that promise, they still rejected him. And that was manifested in his love for them. As he told them, I chose you from all the nations of the world. I loved you. I set you apart for me. Despite all three of those things, they still rejected him. This is amazing to me when I read this. Number three, the third one under God's presence, despite his compassion and his mercy. He revealed that to them over and over and over again. Compassion, mercy, basically long-suffering. How many times did they rebel against him? But remember, they had warned him. There is going to be a time when you're going to push me too far. And my mercy and justice are the same thing. And eventually my justice will take over. Because my holiness cannot take the offense any longer. That is the righteousness of God. So then, number three, despite God's law, he wrote it on tablets of stone and delivered it right into their lap and told them, if you will put yourself within these guidelines, all of these things I'm telling you about, you will go in and you will be a light to all the nations, and I will provide everything you need, and your enemies will fall before you. And when you do this, the other thing about this that is so profound is he's saying, my law, if you follow my law, it's what makes you fully human. It's what makes you who I intended you to be, which is like me. I intended you to be like me. It's what's going to make you holy, and that's when people thrive. When we become like the God who created us, for the purpose he created us, we thrive as people. When we rebel against that, we deteriorate and we disintegrate. And we become corrupt. And so he's saying, I have my law right here for you. And that law will tell you what truth is and what justice is. I tell you, we have a problem with that today. With understanding truth and justice. We don't get it. Just think if we actually lived by truth, and then that truth provided actual justice. Can you imagine how different our world would be? And that's what he's saying. I provided all those things for you. My law gives you a perfect example and image of what truth is and what justice is. But despite that, it wasn't enough. Number four, despite God's warning, He warned them there are blessings for obedience and there's cursings for disobedience. And the cursings will just get worse and worse and worse. Until finally I have to remove you from my presence, which is the path we're on right now of following the prophets. They have been living out the realities of God's presence and rejected him in the midst of it, and now those cursings are going to come about because God's justice is going to be fulfilled. Where I was thinking about this, and I don't really have time to do this, but I'm doing it anyway. I was thinking, you know, no wonder our children stray. It actually brought me comfort. It actually brought me comfort. Because if you can have a parent like God, where he's promised, he's brought you out, delivered you from bondage into freedom. He has given you his presence and his power and his love and his provision and his compassion. He has given you his standards that he wants you to live by that are best for you, to protect you, and to make you the best you can be. And he's given you the warnings of what happens when you don't follow those. Isn't that a parent? Isn't that what you're doing as a parent? That's what I did. Well, to me, if God can do that and his children still stray, then is it necessarily us that causes our children to stray? No, that brought me so much relief because I have this imbalance in my head that says, wait a minute, I thought I did. I tried to be so faithful, God, to do what you called me to do, and yet my children aren't buying it.
Is that right?
Well, yeah. But, you know, she's perfect, so. You can't get better than that. You know. So I thought how interesting that is, that if God's own children rejected his ways, ladies, don't be surprised when your children reject yours. Don't be surprised. And you know, you think you can keep them in a box and keep them obedient and keep them doing what you want them to do. God couldn't even do that. So when they stray and when they fall, look at and take responsibility for the things that are actually your responsibility, but don't take responsibility where it's not. Because now they're adults, just like the children of Israel were. They have the truth set before them, and they get to choose. So it's not always, what did I do? Why, how did I do this? And you know what, we as women will take the blame for that. We think it has to be our fault. But this was encouraging to me, to know that even with the perfect parent, that gives a lot more than I ever gave my children, they still rebelled. They still strayed and went their own way. That was a sideline. That's not even on my notes. Sorry, but this is what I get out of it. So that was free. You know, and then the other thing I thought about this with the truth and the justice was interesting. The concept, well, I regret this, is that I thought of some paradoxes. And the paradoxes that I saw was this. It's funny that we devalue human life in our nation today. And every nation that we're going to talk about that when they begin their downfall, they come to a place where they devalue human life. Like, as you know, Jim talked about last week about how they would offer up their children for sacrifices, trying to get the God to bless them. We devalue human life. And I was thinking about that, and then I thought, wait a minute. No, in a sense, we kind of worship human life because we worship ourselves, right? Like, wow, wait a minute, how can we do both? How can that be? How can we devalue human life and yet exalt human life and worship human life? Isn't that weird? I just thought that's a strange idea, but that's what we do in this country. Because you see, we'll kill babies, but we'll protect sinners and give them all the rights that they need. So we can have a terrorist who kills people, but they've got to have their rights. We've got to take care of them. And people, once they're born, have the right to do whatever they want to do, but we can take their life up to that point. Something seemed weird about that? Yeah. It seems a little odd to me. And then I thought, you know, is there a difference between valuing life and exalting self? Is self and life the same thing? I had to think about that for a while. Because that's what we do. We don't necessarily exalt life, we devalue it. What we do is we exalt self in that life. Do you see the difference? The life is the life of God that we're devaluing. And the self is the self of me. That's what we're exalting. It's the flesh, is what it is. And yet we think we are protecting life. When we pass all these rules so that everybody has their human rights, but we can kill a baby. We devalue life as given by God, but we exalt the self and their rights and privileges. There's something very corrupt about that. I haven't figured it all out yet, but I thought, wow, something seems very twisted here. And I don't know for sure what it is. So we don't really pursue life. We pursue self, is what we do. We don't pursue life because life is given by God, and it's a moving, breathing energy that is involved in all of creation. We don't pursue that kind of life, or we wouldn't kill babies. We pursue self-life, is what we pursue. Totally different things. And we'll see that the decline of nations, the 7 steps to the decline of nations, is going to show us how that happens in every single large nation that's ever been in control. So you will see this if we were to be able to look back at the history of Assyria, and that's the one that's going to come in now and take over the northern kingdom. It happened with Babylonia, who was then the nation that came up and took over Assyria. Huge nations that were in power over large areas of the world, very powerful nations like the United States, probably more so than the United States. And then we have, later on, there were several nations, and then we have Rome, who took over most of the known world at that time. And they actually existed as a nation longer than any other nation had. And it was so interesting to me because I was looking at this, it said that the average time for a nation to exist, a large nation to exist, is 200 years. I was like, really? You're kidding me? Before some kind of breakdown will come and it will change into something else. But Rome lasted 300 years. I thought, wow, that's fast. I didn't realize that. You know what? We're on the outs here. It's time for us to come down because our 200 years is up. So no wonder. And I just thought, I never knew that. Okay, so we're going to look at the next section is going to be the steps to the decline of nations. So Israel was corrupt and they were beginning to decline. The thing that separates Israel from, and I mean Israel and Judah combined, that separates them from these nations that we're going to be talking about them is that they were purposely set apart by God to do a job. Now all the other nations are too, but he was not in their midst setting them apart as his chosen people. That's why I went over the corruption that was going on inside of Israel first, before I talked about the breakup of a nation. So, and I looked into this and did some research into this, and this was a very interesting, everywhere I went, they had pretty much the same ideas. So I'm going to give you 7 steps to the decline of nations. You can find this on the internet, anywhere you want to find it. This isn't stuff I made up. This is stuff that they have actually researched and see that they'll just sometimes express it differently. For some it'll be 6, for some it'll be 10, whatever. These 7 look to me pretty much exactly what's going on in Israel. And boy, the relativeness to United States of America, don't miss it. Don't miss the United States while we look at Israel and the prophets. Don't miss that we're making the same mistakes. Same mistakes. And remember, we're past our 200 years. So, number 1, the 7 steps to the decline of a nation. Number 1, and this was in every list, breakdown of the family unit. Breakdown of the family unit.
That's number 1.
I don't know that it was number 1 in priority on all the lists, but in this particular list and in several others, it was the top priority. And it makes sense because it says that it is the building block to every thriving society. How do you build a nation without families? You don't. So we see that the breakdown of the family unit is your number 1 thing, I would say, it's going to start right there. So you have families that are solid, you have these relationships that are going on, and from that comes a nation. And then once the nation's formed, the foundation underneath begins to crumble in the family unit, and then the nation comes down. So just one of those things. Number 2, education. The family unit's responsibility to teach character, morality, truth, and social values. Social values. Whose values did Israel take on? The nation, the corrupt nations around them. They no longer were teaching their children those wonderful guidelines that God gave them on what it means to be fully human and to fully serve me and be like who you were intended to be when I created you. Now we're looking out and letting the social arena define who we are. This is scary to me. Because, you know what? I was a teacher for 21 years. I've seen the breakdown of character, morality, truth, and social values in the next generations. It's not pretty. Okay, number 3, religion. I want you to be careful with this because I tried to think of another term, but they all put religion on there, and I couldn't think of another way to put it. But I don't like that term. I don't like the term religion, but I understand what they're saying. And to me, religion really is the plumb line for absolute truth. That's what religion should be. The belief, religion is, I'm assuming, it would be a light definition for those who don't even believe in our God. But religion is a belief in someone bigger than us that calls the shots, that has decided what is right and what is wrong, what is justice, what is morality, what is truth, what is all those things. Somebody bigger than us has decided that and passed it down to us, right? That's what I would define as religion to be. And so it should be the plumb line then, how from that person or that thing, whatever it is our thing that we put our religion around. They are the ones that determine those things. And from that absolute truth, that plumb line of absolute truth, we gain 2 things. We know that the God that we serve didn't just create us, he created everything. In fact, he's not just a creator. You've heard me say this before. He is life. He is existence. Everything that we know or can't know or that is in him. He's not just a big guy who decides, well, I like it this way and you shouldn't do it this way. I like that. He's not like that. He is the one that creates all things. Therefore, absolute truth has to be defined by him. Right? Because he's the only one who knows it. Because he is it. He is the absolute truth. So we cannot find truth outside of who he is, anywhere. But, like the nation of Israel, we are searching for absolute truth somewhere outside of God. And like Israel, today, we're not finding absolute truth outside of God. We're finding truth is relative outside of God. Exact same thing that they found. So when I say religion, I mean when the breakdown of who we decide is the source of absolute truth. When we no longer have that, and we start thinking on our own, we're going to self-destruct. There's no other way around it. Because we have no idea who we are or how we should live. Everybody has a different idea of what that should look like. They're right. The people out there, they're right. Without God, there is no absolute truth. So I will give them that. If you're an atheist and you say there is no, I'm going to say, yeah. If you're an atheist, there would have to be no absolute truth. But get ready to fall then, because that's the only place it's going to take you. And that's a whole other thing I need to... Okay, so the thing with this is that this religious plumb line, this absolute truth determines, and this is where we totally break down, especially within the church. If we have a plumb line, then it is going to determine by that absolute truth our absolute value as human beings, because it defines us. That truth will define who we are as human beings. That's why, if there is a breakdown in that and there is no absolute truth, then there is no value in a human being. Because now our definition of who we are is up for grabs. That's a scary place to me. And that's exactly where we sit. Every nation that ever fell to these things. Multiple religions, anybody can believe whatever they want to believe, and everything, whatever's good for you is good for you. Takes them down. Because we lose our value in who we are as humans. And then we lose our purpose for why we live. So no longer, if I lose my value, that I'm valuable by the God of the universe, who is life, who is existence, and he has decided who I am as a person, and he values me in that, which means that then I value all others that are in that same position, then I'm also going to, if I lose that, I'm going to lose, why am I here then? That's going to be the immediate outcome of losing your value, is that you don't have your purpose. Because if God defined human beings for a specific value, if he saw value in them for a reason, then they also have purpose. That's why you can't kill a baby and exalt a self. You can't. It's a contradiction in terms, and they don't even know it. So, if we lose religion, we lose absolute truth, and we lose our value as human beings, and we lose our purpose as human beings. And this is where the church is today. We are walking such a fine line in this, because we are trying to find our value, and we've been, since our first breath, we have been inundated with the idea that people around you give you value. That's what we're raised with, that idea, that people around you decide whether you are valuable or not, because their truth is important, and their truth might be different than yours. So if they see it different and you're wrong, then you're not valuable. So if they see beauty as their value system, and instead of the other systems, then you're not as valuable if you're not beautiful, right? If your people around you decide that youth is is the reason to live, then by golly, when you're no longer youthful, you no longer have value, right? And is that America? Yeah. I'd say that's America. Yeah. And you could go on and on all day long about that, those very two things. And we as the church have been duped in it. So we have lost our purpose because we don't understand our value. And we're letting others, we say we believe in absolute truth, but we're not believing the absolute truth. We're believing the variable truth of the people around us. When we let other people determine our value, and we adapt the way we live because we want somebody else to accept us, they have now become the one who determines our value. That's idol worship, is what that is. We now have another God. Number 4, every nation that falls will eventually, because, and I want you to see the progression here, from this idea of the plumb line, losing the plumb line of absolute truth, to no value, no purpose. We seek then, to find our purpose and our value, we seek pleasure. Pleasure means we get everything out of life that we can because there's no other reason to live, right? We don't have any other reason to live. So we might as well, live it up, because today we live, tomorrow we die. So we become pleasure seekers. You can see it has to progress to that point. This is a natural progression of this downfall. And that, when we become pleasure seekers, we become immoral. It affects our morality. That's the next downslide of every nation, is their morality becomes defined by people who want what feels good. Because they have no value, they have no purpose. Now we get to decide what goes on, and if life has no value, if it ends here, why not just live it up while we can? And we get to decide what that looks like. It's a progression. It's a progression, there's no doubt about it. We become pleasures seekers, and that affects our morality. Everything we do today is a product of the flesh, and that's your one below there. So flesh becomes the plumb line for truth. Flesh, how we feel about things, because there's no absolute truth, now becomes the replacement for truth. So whatever feels good to me, that's the truth. And that brings nations down. That's what Israel's doing. That's what the United States of America is doing. That's what Babylon did. That's what Assyria did. That's what Rome did. That's what it's just a natural progression of human beings that are caught in the cycle of sin. So the next one is the economy. How are our economics within our nations regulated? What is the motivating factor for our economics? Because that's a part of the reality of life. Whether you are farmers that are bartering to live, or whether you are people on Wall Street that are selling stocks to live, money is the outcome of having a society. So how is that regulated? What is that motivated by? Would it be in every single one of these nations, if we've lost our value and our purpose and become pleasure seekers, our economy is going to be motivated by greed and power. What I can get, what else is there? There is no other place to go with is where you go when these things happen, and you can see the natural progression. And when we're done, I want you to try to figure out, where are we in America today in this cycle? So, and it's motivated by greed and power instead of personal productivity. Due to our value and our purpose, we produce things that are good for human beings because we're valuable. Instead of doing that and becoming very productive people who can reflect who we were created to be and the gifts that God gave us, we now are after greed and power. That's why we exist. That's why we do what we do. We no longer do it for the right purposes. We do it for greed and power. Then the next thing, of course, is that's going to flood over into government, which is also a natural part of having a society. You've got to have a government. God established that with the law and the priesthood. So governments are natural outcomes of having a society of people. But if governments were placed under God's control, we would have justice and we would have truth, right? Because we've lost all those things in these other processes. Now government is motivated by greed and power instead of serving the people we value that have a purpose within that society. Now it's all about me. It's all about self. It's all about what feels right for me. How can I fulfill my fleshly longings? And that shows up in greed and power, where that comes. So the government becomes that. And then the last one is the military. The outcome of, we have to have a military. That was even done. Israel had a military. But eventually, the military takes on that same mindset, and no longer are we there to protect the people we value, right? If people are valuable and we have been set up, like a king is set up, and then his military underneath him are there to promote the good of the people because they're valuable and they have a purpose, that's the point of the military within the government. Instead, they are overextended to an insatiable desire to have more, whether it's land or anything else, and control more. That now becomes the point of the military. How can we use our military to satisfy our greed and our power? And everything becomes distorted, and it all goes back to the fact that we've lost our value, we've lost our purpose, because we've lost absolute truth. We no longer have the plumb line. That's where Israel was. That's what Amos is speaking to. And you will see it as you read the chapters. He speaks to every single one of these categories of life. And every one of them is corrupted. And that's why he said, if you're going to continue to be corrupt in your practices toward God, and therefore corrupt your nation, corrupt your people, corrupt the religion, corrupt the military, corrupt your government, if the kings are corrupt and all the people under him are corrupt, then you are going to fall. There is no other option. So the challenge question, where are we as a nation in this process? And what part does the church play in it? Remember, the church is here for a purpose as well. And we, if we do this right, if we pay attention to what God is saying, if we stay in his truth, we will know our purpose, right? And we will know our value. And because of that, we will live our lives accordingly. And whether it changes the whole nation, or whether we end up with like people like Amos, who when he died, he knew he had to have influenced some of those people, right? He totally had to have influenced some of those people. That's what we want to do. Within our sphere of influence, do they see that God is absolute truth, or do they see that we are living according to the pattern of this world? That's our goal, to become holy people. That's our part to play, just like it was Amos's part to play. Hopefully that's why we're here today, is because it is his word that continues to change us. Otherwise, we are no different than Israel. No different. We will rebel, we will fall away, we will do all of these things and live according to the lust of our flesh, just like they did, unless we keep the plumb line of God in front of us. Let's pray. Father, I thank you that you are absolute truth. And I thank you that though we live in a nation where there is opposition to that, to where we may be called fools, we may be oppressed, we may be persecuted, we may be considered invaluable, We know that that's our calling. Like it was Israel's calling to be lights to the nations around them, our calling is to be lights in a corrupt society. But the only way we can do that is to not fall into the pitfalls of what the whole nation is falling into. How do we stand against that? Oh, Lord, we just need wisdom. And we need your heart, because we are fleshly people who really long to be satisfied just like everyone else. And if you do not step in our lives, we will end up in the same place. So we beg for your mercy. We beg that you will just press upon our hearts the truth and the plumb line that you've given us, and the love, and the passionate love, and the grace that you've given us to walk that walk. Help us to be strong and courageous in this, and know that you are the one who goes before us in power and might. Thank you for your word being so clear. Thank you for Amos